Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 1st chapter, text number 42. Soham harer martya vidambanena Drisho ninam kalayato vidatuhu Nanyopalakshayaha vadim pasadach Sharami pashyad gatu vishmayortra Saha aham. Therefore, I, Harer, of the personality of Godhead, Martya, in this mortal world, Vidambanena, without being recognized, Drishaha, on sight, Ninam, of the people in general, Chalayataha, bewildering, Vidatuhu, in order to do it. Not, Anya, other. Upalakshaha, seen by others. Padavim, glories. Prasadat, by the grace of. Charami, do travel. Pashyan, by seeing. Gata Vishmayaha, without doubt. Atra, in this matter. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. I am not astonished at this, having traveled over the world without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this material world, are bewildering to others, but I know of His greatness by His grace, and thus I am happy in all respects. Responsibly. I am not astonished at this, having traveled over the world without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this mortal world, are bewildering to others. But I know His greatness by His grace, and thus I am happy in all respects. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Although he was the brother of Dhritarashtra, Vidura was completely different. By the grace of Lord Krishna, he was not foolish like his brother, and thus his brother's association could not influence him. Dhritarashtra and his materialistic sons wanted to falsely lord it over the world by dint of their own strength. The Lord encouraged them in this, and thus they became more and more bewildered. But Vidura wanted to achieve sincere devotional service of the Lord, and therefore became a soul absolutely surrendered to the absolute personality of Godhead. He could realize this in the progress of his pilgrim's journey, and thus he was freed from all doubts. He was not at all sorry to be bereft of his hearth and home, because he now had experienced that dependence on the mercy of the Lord is greater than freedom, than so-called freedom at home. A person could not be in the renounced order of life unless he is firmly convinced of being protected by the Lord. This stage of life is explained in Bhagavad Gita as abhayam sattva samshuddhihi. Every living entity is factually completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. But unless one is in the state of existence, unless one is in the pure state of existence, he cannot be established in this position. The stage of dependence is called sattva samshuddhihi, or purification of one's existence. The realization, the result of such purification, is exhibited in fearlessness. A devotee of the Lord, who is called Narayana Pada, is never afraid of anything, because he is always aware of the fact that the Lord protects him in all circumstances. With this conviction, Vidura traveled alone, and he was not seen or recognized by any friend or foe. Thus he enjoyed freedom of life without obligation to the many duties of the world. When Lord Sri Krishna was personally present in the mortal world in his eternal blissful form of Shyamasundara, those who were not pure devotees of the Lord could not recognize him or know his glories. Avapananti mamnidha manusham tanumashritam, Bhagavad Gita 9.11. He is always bewildering to the non-devotees, but he is always seen by the devotees by dint of their pure devotional service to him. Mukham karoti vachalam pangam langayate girim yatkari patarham bande shrigarudinutarane. Dhritarashtra, a very evil politician, in a way is sort of like everyone in the material world. He was trying to be the leader of the world, even though he was blind. And as Prabhupada writes in the purport, he was nothing like his brother, Vidura. Of course, the history of Vidura is that he's actually Yamaraj in a previous life. He was cursed by Manduka Muni for bringing a very harsh judgment against the Muni. Anyway, that's another story. But unlike today, or very much like today, Dhritarashtra is very much unlike his blood brother. So we are very much unlike our blood relatives, our fathers, our mothers, our sisters, our brothers. We tend to be very unlike them. But in previous ages, people were very much like their brothers and sisters, and like Sanatana and Rupa were brothers. And when there's the story of Gopinatha Paranayika, confirmed. There's a story of Gopinatha Paranatika, who was to be executed. He was on the brink of being executed, being tossed upon upraised swords. It was a very brutal type of death, because he had quarreled with the prince. He had a sort of, the prince had a bit of an idiosyncrasy of sort of a twitch, and Gopinatha Paranatika made fun of him, and so they started quarreling, and he was Gopinath Paranatika was a tax collector, and he did owe some money to the king, and he used the funds for sinful activities. But when the king, who was a very religious person, very dedicated to Lord Chaitanya, found out that he was about to be executed, he commuted the sentence. He thought it was a very brutal thing for someone who was just, all he wanted to do, he said, was to get the money that was due the government, because he was a tax collector and he wasn't paying all the money. So the king not only excused him from being executed, but allowed him to be the tax collector in the same jurisdiction that he had always had, in the same province. Not only that, but he increased his salary, gave him a gift, and he told him that anyone who is a relative of the Roy family, he was a relative of Bhavananda Roy and Ramananda Roy, is a dear friend of mine. So there was a lot of similarity in blood relatives, and he said that the king said that I didn't know that you had a quarrel with the prince, and he exonerated him. Not only exonerated him, but doubled his salary, and gave him a gift, and told him that because he was in the family of the Royas, he was a special person. So he was exonerated. So those things happened a lot in the past, but nowadays they don't happen very often, that our own blood relatives are like we are. Anyway, that's just a kind of an interesting thing, that these two were brothers, but it shows that families are not necessarily the measure of devotion. They were, as Prabhupada writes in the purport, they were completely different people. And finally, at the very end of his life, Dhritarashtra was able to see the light, and he left home. when in his old age, because he was convinced by Vidura, not convinced, but somehow or other Vidura brought him around to his way of thinking a little bit, that he had to give up this world. But he was a very evil person. And it was Vidura who actually was saintly. And he saved the Pandavas. He told them about Dhritarashtra's plan to burn them to death, burn them alive in the house of lac or lacquer. It was made of shellac. And he spoke, Vidura spoke to the Pandavas in another language that other people couldn't understand. I think it was the language of the Nishadas. It was a very, very esoteric kind of thing, but he kind of tipped them off that you have to get out of here before you get burned to death. And so they dug a tunnel underneath, as you know, they dug a tunnel underneath the house and escaped the fire. And so Vidura protected them, even though he was in the family of Dhritarashtra, technically. But he wasn't of the same mentality at all. He was the saintly person, and he was actually Yamaraj, who was cursed to take birth as a Shudra. So he temporarily took this birth, and even though he was born as a Shudra, from a Shudra family, he was saintly, and he protected the Pandavas. And this indicates that you can be in a family that's evil and still be saintly. And this migrates into the conception of Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. There's a whole chapter devoted to this, Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. It's a very difficult thing. Achintya Veda Veda Tattva technically means inconceivably one and different. And it's inconceivable because it is inconceivable. How something can be one and different at the same time. And so this is a whole chapter. Many pages are devoted to discussing how this can happen. And Prabhupada even said that the concept of simultaneous one and difference, of unity and diversity, he called it, should be discussed every year by the leaders of the movement in Mayapur. So it's not a simple thing, unity and diversity, or Achintya Veda Tattva. It's been used over and over again. In fact, I think it's even used as a slogan or for the European economic community, but it doesn't really tally because no one really understands what it means. I mean, nobody understands. That's why the word achintya is used. It's totally inconceivable. Anyways, just to digress momentarily, there's a devotee named Urvasi who recently died. Not the Urvasi that we know, that's Australian, but I think she's from Chicago. Anyway, after she passed away, and it was just a few days ago when she left her body, but Siddhanta, who created the memory series, thought to include a little piece that he did on her some years ago. Well, she was in Chicago. She was in the Chicago airport. This is her story. And and Prabhupada had said, I don't know, very recently, that, I don't know if it was in the airport or just a few days before, but there was a very burgeoning controversy over the fact that the physiology of males and females were different. And one of the facts is that females had 32-ounce brains and males had 64-ounce brains. Not, of course, this has been contested in a lot of ways, which I'll get into later on. That weight and size don't have anything to do with intelligence, which is a kind of ethereal. But anyway, this controversy was raging, and so what she was doing was she was in the Chicago airport when this happened. And it was very much on people's minds that, women have 32-ounce brains and men have 64-ounce brains. And I think this was even confirmed that somewhere that Prabhupada, one of his teachers, weighed the brains of cadavers and found out that this is actually true. But again, it's just a physical thing. So anyway, the story is that the controversy was very much raging, and he saw Prabhupada, while he was waiting for his flight, saw one of his female disciples distributing books. And he's on record of saying, when he saw that, he said, well, all my female disciples have 64-ounce brains. I think that really happened. So getting into the idea of weight and size not having to do anything with intelligence, this was purported by a number of people who are intelligent, or they're involved in intellectual pursuits, and they said that the size doesn't matter. weight doesn't matter. Its intelligence is too ethereal. It doesn't depend on size. Anyway, this controversy was raging for a while. There's another story that I should probably not tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway. There was a devotee named Jivananda who was a very sort of small and frail man. This was in 1967 in San Francisco. And there were a lot of sort of, pot smoking and drug taking people in the Haight-Ashbury at that time. That's about where he was located. And some very, very sort of muscular man threatened him and threatened to beat him up. And he had him pinned up against the wall. And he didn't have anything to protect him. He just shouted Nrsimhadev at the top of his lungs. And he said it so loudly that the people in neighboring apartments sort of threw their windows open and started, what's all this commotion? What's going on? And it because these windows opened and people started saying, what's happening? The big bruiser sort of got freaked out, and he just left the scene, and Jivananda was saved by Lord Chaitanya Dev. And as Prabhupada writes in the purport, that when devotees, the reason I delved into this story was that he says that the devotees are fearless. And he mentions this in relation to Vidura traveling the world unrecognized, that he's totally fearless. And that's a very sophisticated position that very few people can say that they are without fear. I mean, we're always in fear of death, we're in fear of atomic war, we're in fear of lots of things. But devotees are completely fearless. That happens almost invisibly, just like Vidura was invisible. He traveled invisibly. People couldn't see him. He was kind of like the invisible man. I mean, he really was. And Krishna is like that. And as Prabhupada mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, it's mentioned Abhudimanti man mudha. That what's the verse? Mam mudha manusham tanum ashritam. That no one actually is able to see, especially ordinary people. They don't see who Krishna. They think he's ordinary. They don't see that he's a spiritual person. So that distinguishes the completely spiritual person from the material person. The fools deride me when I descend, he says, in human form. So when he descends in human form, they think he's an ordinary person, and he plays just exactly like an ordinary person. He's a dancer, he's a devoted son when he's very young, and he cries real tears when his mother chastises him or rebukes him for doing something wrong. He cries real tears. So he's like the best actor in the world, in the universe. He can play the part of an ordinary person perfectly. And people who aren't devotees think he's an ordinary person, so much so that the people in the material world think he's an ordinary person. That's the supreme ability of Krishna. It's the last verse in the Bhagavad Gita talks about Krishna owning everything, and Prabhupada described this as the peace formula. Gyat vimam shanti mrichyati are the last few words in the verse, and that's the real peace formula. And because people don't believe that Krishna is the owner of the whole universe, they're at war with each other. They're at war with each other over minor things. Nations, states, individuals, they're at war with each other over practically nothing. And if we look at the political situation, we can see that there are big wars over very trifling matters. According to the Srimad Bhagavatam and many other scriptures, Kali Yuga is like that people they develop animosity over very trifling and minor things. They have warfare, and they even fight to the death over, I mean, like there was in the First World or on the Second World War, Americans were fighting Germans. And when they came up close and they started stabbing them, they realized that they were actually people, just like we were. They weren't German or we weren't American, but they were just people. Yet they were killing and fighting over these false designations of I'm a German, I'm an American. That's what they were fighting over, and it didn't make any sense. But it was a very and Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin and there's Genghis Khan. Yeah, he was supposed to be the worst war criminal in history, and he killed many people. And he according to the historical record, that he put a machete or a knife to the throat of many Hindus and said, if you don't convert to Mohammedanism now, Genghis Khan said this, I'm going to kill you. And so there were many people that were killed. I mean, brutally, not just that their throats were slit; they were cut into pieces. I mean, that was a very brutal situation. And Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler have reputations for doing similar things, very, very brutal acts. I think Stalin even had Trotsky executed when Trotsky was in Mexico, and I think he was, as I remember, he was stabbed through the ear with an ice pick. Brutal killing. And on the other side of the world, this is politics, because Trotsky had a different political view than Joseph Stalin. So even though it's very minor in one way, it's a life and death situation to the people who fight. And the story is, there's another story about Joseph Stalin, that when he was operated on, he had a very serious procedure done on his stomach. He refused to be anesthetized. He refused to be made unconscious because the story goes that he was worried. He was concerned that his political enemies might come and kill him while he was unconscious. So this is the story of Kali Yuga. It's a very difficult age to live in, and people that are criminals, they do have something to fear. I mean, even there's the story of Maharaj Pariksit. It's told in the beginning of the Bhagavatam that he drew his sword upon someone who was torturing a cow. And it means that people who were Raja Rishis, who were loved by their citizens, sometimes had to take steps to protect them, to punish the wrongdoers, even though they were very Raja Rishis, even though they were very very kind to others. So these are some of the things that happen with the Raja Rishis. And a Raja Rishi is a person who loves all subjects, all people, all plants, all trees, all grass, all bushes. That's the meaning of a saintly person. I think I told the story that when Srila Prabhupada was in Dallas, Texas, he learned that a tree had been cut down. And he was very disturbed about this. It was right in or near the Gurukul that a tree was actually cut down. And he says in one of his little booklets, the teachings of Prahlad Maharaj, that the cutting of trees is one of the most sinful acts ever. So now we look at like books that are very popular, like the Harry Potter series and other books. I mean, millions and millions of trees are cut down to propagate a novel. And many millions of trees are also cut down to print horrible gutter press newspapers in England, the what they call the tabloids. They have a very bad reputation. And when I was there, I saw these big rolls of paper, big rolls, hundreds of them, in Fleet Street, where all these people lived or did their business in the tabloids. They were all articles about sex, meat eating, and gambling, and politicians condemning one another, and plane crashes, of course, and who won the football game. That was what they were promoting. And as a result, millions of trees had to die. They died because of horrible newspapers. And they're still doing it. Anyways, those are just some of the things. So I'm going to read the verse again, and maybe we have time for some comments or questions. I am not astonished at this, having traveled over the world without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this mortal world, are bewildering to others. But I know of his greatness by his grace, and thus I am happy in all respects. This is Vidura speaking. So any reflections or comments or questions or anything? Yes?
I was wondering if you could
Well, the first thing is don't do it. There was a man who came to Prabhupada once, and he said that he gets high taking LSD, so why should he chant Hare Krishna just to get high? And Prabhupada said, well, if you want to get high, you don't have to take the substance. You can just chant Hare Krishna. So that's there was a little pamphlet, a little leaflet that was distributed called "Stay High Forever," and people are taking intoxicants to feel good. I know when I was in hospital and had a heart operation, they gave me an angioplasty full of morphine, and I was thinking everything's all right. I was really in La La Land, and then when I woke up, I realized that it was a life or death operation about to take place. So I think the best advice to give people who take things like that is that you can get the same emotional feeling of fearlessness and oneness and happiness without having to take it. And just try it. It's going to work. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I just find it's very.
And we know that it's a sinful activity. We recite every day to commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting Hare Krishna. I mean, if they think, or if we say it in such a way that they think that they can chant Hare Krishna and absolve themselves of all, atone for all their sinful activity, that's a sin.
Well, that's what I know. I don't know a lot of devotees. There's some devotees, they do chant Hare Krishna and they encourage other devotees to come and chant, but they do take intoxication.
Well, I think I had this discussion with Sita the other day, and the idea is that subtly they're thinking that they're going to counteract their sinful activities by chanting Hare Krishna. Well, it doesn't work that way. That's why we recite that it's actually an offense. It's kind of interesting that in some religions there's a technique known as confession, and I was in Los Angeles in a place called it was a city south of Los Angeles. I can't remember the name of it. It was a little city. Anyway, we gave a class in this high school called Mary Mother of the Sea, Oceanside. That's the name of the city. And the priest, there was a young priest about 25 or 28 years old who was listening very attentively to our class. And then he said, "I want to talk with you after your class." And then he took us into his office or his chambers and said that I hear confessions every week, and the same people come sometimes week after week, and they're committing the same sins week after week, and they're thinking that if I hear their confession, they're going to be absolved of all sins. So, and he said, what do you guys think about this? I mean, he was genuinely trying to understand what it means, and we told him that it's a principle in Srimad Bhagavatam that atonement is not accepted. What they call atonement. There was a man named Budi Roy, I think his name was? Buddhimanta Khan. And he had committed so many sinful activities as typical capitalist. You have to commit sinful activities. You have to exploit people. You have to lie. And he was told that his only atonement could be that he would drink hot lead or hot ghee. And he said, well, I can't do that. I'll die. And finally, he encountered some devotees, and they said, well, if you chant Hare Krishna and if you move to Vrindavan, you will be exonerated of all sinful activities. You'll be freed from all. That's the best form of freeing yourself. So these people, they have to be advised, if you chant Hare Krishna and live in a sacred place and don't do it again, that's the best thing. I mean, the people don't realize that the peace formula is there in the Bhagavad Gita. And yet they're fighting over trifles. Yes?
Also, I find a lot of devotees these days drink coffee and tea. So is that at the same level as
Well, I take it. I mean, I take caffeine, but I take it for medicinal reasons. Small amounts of it, of course. But Prabhupada gave us the formula for not taking anything, even mildly intoxicating, like tea and coffee, because they have caffeine in them, and even sugar, excessive sugar, is a bit of a intoxicant. So he informed us that just don't do it. I mean, it's not a big thing to give up tea and coffee. It's not a big thing to give up excessive sugar and Hershey bars or Cadbury bars.
Well, I think some devotees, they work very hard and they just need that coffee to keep up.
That's what they say. I mean, I even know some people like that. But it's a habit. Nicotine or caffeine or whatever, it's a habit. You just have to have it to get going, to do your work. It's not actually the case. I mean, like Sanatana Rupa slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, and Raghunath Goswami slept sometimes not at all. And why? Why did they didn't need any caffeine. They were just immersed in Krishna consciousness, and that was their stimulant. So you don't need anything else. You don't need caffeine, you don't need nicotine, you don't need cigarettes, you don't need all that stuff, any of it. If you chant Hare Krishna and you take shelter of Krishna's philosophy and his devotees, you really don't need it. So my advice is don't do it if you don't have to.
Thank you.
My question is, you mentioned that birth is not an indication of devotion, so the same principle could apply that for devotees born in a devotee family or someone who's initiated. And then how do we avoid this complacency that, oh, I'm born in a devotee family, or I'm already initiated and I'm going through the motions? How do we not try to go deeper and not just be complacent?
Well, of course, everybody who chants Hare Krishna is committing sinful activities. I mean, not everybody is, but like newcomers, I mean, it's natural to have illicit sex, gamble, and eat meat, and all those things. And so we have to be tolerant to people. But they should know, if they're listening, if they're reading these books and they're hearing classes, that in the ultimate end, we have to give up these things, even though we're doing it now. So we have to be, on the one hand, very tolerant, and on the other hand, very strict. I mean, if we're initiated devotees, we take vows to give up these things in front of the deities, in front of the fire, in front of the spiritual master. So it's a serious business. I mean, in one sense, because Krishna consciousness is very glittery. People are nice, the food is good, the music is beautiful, the place is very clean. But it's more than that. There's an austerity involved. You have to give up certain things to take part in such an institution. So the recreation kind of dissolves. The recreational aspect dissolves after some time. It's not all fun and games. Not all love and flowers. I think people have to learn that they can be in a clean place. They can have lots of friends and be around good music, and have very nice food. But there's a price to pay for all that. It's not a big price, but it is a price. It's called austerity. Anyways, that's I don't know if that's a very complete answer. It's probably not. I mean, you could discuss this kind of stuff for months and years, and still, not get to the bottom of it. Any others? Yes.
Hare Krishna. It's been doing a reading of Miracle on Second Avenue.
Pardon?
With some other ladies, and they really love it. And
Oh, that's good.
just thinking of this, it was so graphic. How Prabhupada just didn't didn't beat people over the head, but he gave them a higher taste, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. It's just so simple.
He seemed to be very positive and only told people about the austerities at a later time.
Yeah, but then after you got the taste, you were going to hang on.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Thank you.
So I think we'll end there because breakfast is getting cold.